Welcome to Think Deeply, Speak Simply, brought to you by Prezent, a show about the art and science of communicating ideas and how business professionals can unlock their careers and achieve their full potential with great communication. And now, here are your hosts, Jay Rook and Antoine Valentone.
And with that, let's welcome Corinne Mason to the show. Corinne, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're stoked you're here. Corinne, you have a rich corporate history of talent management, and you're currently a partner at Summit Leadership and an advocate for women's leadership. Tell us about your executive coaching practice and how you work with clients, please.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about Summit, because I think that's an interesting thing. So our company is a company that works with high growth, mid-market, private and public firms, so companies, and specifically in that space because leaders in those organizations don't tend to have had the same sort of executive development or leadership development that, say, Fortune 500s might have had. So we go in and help to support those leaders as they try to scale and as complexity increases as their companies grow. So that's a lot of fun. One of the things that I do in that space is what a lot of people might call executive coaching. I actually call it performance and accountability partnering. Right. So my job is really to help come in, help you figure out where you want to focus, and then get very specific with you about how you're going to go after those things. And by the way, not always things that are challenges or opportunities, sometimes things that are strengths that you just need to continue to build.
Yes.
So I think that's a really important practice that we do. And then I have a specific passion around women as leaders. I think we're finally in a place, I'm in my 50s, so it's been a long journey for me. We're finally in this place where women are sitting on boards, they're starting their own companies, they're becoming entrepreneurs, they're getting investment finally, right? Yeah. And so my goal, my dream is to help support those women so that they feel like they belong and they have all the support they need to be successful.
I love the vision. Thank you for sharing that. In a world of ever diminishing attention spans, how do you advise your clients to best capture their listeners' attention?
I'm sorry, did you say something? Just kidding.
Well played.
Just kidding. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to think about. Look, we all have so much coming at us at any given time that we really do have to slow down, take a breath, right? But there are three things that I would say to, say, a person I was coaching. One is remain concise. Have three critical points to your message and stick to it. Mm-hmm. The second would be interesting. So tell authentic stories. And maybe the most important one is actually be interested. So listen to others and ask great questions.
Great advice. And I love the conciseness of that, particularly the be interesting one. For newer executives, do you ever see a connection between imposter syndrome and their ability to command an audience?
So it's an interesting conversation that we're starting to have around imposter syndrome. We see this a lot when it comes to women and minorities in particular, right? Yep. And the whole idea of imposter syndrome is that we don't feel like we deserve either our achievements or the accolades that we're getting from others. And when you really think about what that means, it means that on some level, we're lacking in confidence. There's a confidence issue, right? So to me, it's this confidence issue that begins to directly link to that ability to show up with any authenticity or even to show up with gravitas, sort of that feeling of, I can show up here confidently and say something to you that you will find interesting. So I think that's how the imposter syndrome piece links to this communicating with an audience piece.
Mm-hmm. And to your earlier point around being interesting, if we're not confident, it's tough to own that uniqueness and be interesting. We're more likely to kind of water down ourselves and stay as vanilla or neutral as possible. So I love that.
I'm guessing you find that with your clients too, right? Like we show up with more authenticity, the better we feel about ourselves.
100%. And so when leaders are deficient in their ability to influence, where do they often get it wrong in addition to confidence?
Yeah, I think when you think back to the first few times that you actually had to lead people, almost all of us make this mistake that we think that those people are going to do something because either our plan is so awesome and so good, or they just report into us, so they have to. Right? So that's early leadership kinds of things. What's a shame is when I work with more senior people who've been at it a long time. So I have a person, for example, right now that I'm coaching, who is a chief revenue officer, senior salesperson in an organization. He just changed an entire team's structure. He changed the entire comp plan for that team. And he's wondering why he's not getting any results. And it's because he did it to the team. So I think a lot of times, where we are deficient in our influence is not to do the work along the way of having the conversation with people from the very beginning. Look, you may be the smartest person in the room. You may know exactly what you need to get done. If you don't communicate that with people as you go along and get their ideas and help them understand why it's important to do, when you introduce that plan after it's all kind of summed up in period at the end of the sentence, they're not going to go with you unless you've included them along the way, right? So there's work to be done in that.
Yes. Talk to us about the mindset of confidence and how that connects to how we receive speakers.
Think about the first time that you learned something. So I like to try to challenge myself. One of the things, I learned Spanish in my early days, like back in high school, and it's been a while since I've practiced. I'm now back down in Texas, so I kind of want to get better at it again. But when I try to speak in Spanish, all of my mental capability is taken up with trying to figure out how to speak in Spanish. I actually don't listen all that well because all of my mental capability is taken up with that. I think it's true when we don't feel confident about something, anything. Our mental capability, our capacity to think beyond what is going on with us is limited until we feel like we have more confidence, more experience, just the general ability to sort of open up. But the most important thing we can do is to kind of have that mental flexibility where we can really ask deeper questions, we can connect with other people, we can tell better stories. On this one, though, I think there's a caveat.
Please.
And that is, you can also overuse a strength. So there is such a thing as being overconfident too. And I think when you have overconfidence, you start to think of yourself as sort of the smartest or most experienced person in the room, right? And this can really start to shut us down to listening to other people too, because now we think we know it all.
Right.
So we're either in this stage where we're trying to learn and we don't have the capacity, or we're in this stage where we know it all and we're not listening. And we've got to find that middle spot. That's the spot we want to be in.
100%. Thank you. The theme of today's episode is to get your audience to listen. What are some simple ways that business leaders can begin to improve upon this competency?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about this theme of confidence, right? So check your own sense of confidence. You have to show up believing that you actually have something to say. I think that's number one. Number two, make sure to always find a group of advisors and check your assumptions. Going into something, make sure you have others who are sharing their thoughts, practically and helpfully a diverse group of advisors and others who are coming in to give you perspective so that you're not just hearing an echo chamber of your own thoughts.
Yeah.
Remember that listening can be just as important as talking. You know this. This is why you're a podcast leader, right? And then also make sure, like we said, to bring other people with you on the journey to create that experience together. It's sort of this experiential learning piece.
Yes, thank you. What are some of the nuances between holding attention while interacting one-on-one versus when we're speaking to an audience?
Yeah, I think this is so important. I watch leaders get it wrong in both of those spaces, but for totally different reasons.
Do tell.
In the one-on-one in particular, if you think about things like performance feedback or even development conversations, in truth, people leaders are not really good at those things because they're afraid of them. Mm-hmm. They're afraid to have this open, transparent dialogue where you may actually have to tell somebody what you need them to do differently. And the way you overcome that, the way that you really get attention is to look at them deeply into their eyes, right? Really understand their perspective. Ask more questions than you're telling. That's the one-on-one piece. If you believe, if you work for me and you believe that I care about you, I care about what you want, and I'm just trying to help you get better, then I think that's going to hold your attention. So that's the one-on-one. In the group setting, look, I'm nervous to be on this podcast. I think there are probably people who are nervous when they get up in front of, big groups. And in terms of getting up in front of small groups, that I think takes a little bit more, again, back to that confidence. But also, did you think through who was in the room? What did they need to hear from you? How were they going to interact with you? And by the way, I think there always should be some kind of feedback component. Either you collect questions up front, you do it in the room, but it needs to be a two-way dialogue. If it's one way, to me, it's just noise.
Well said. What advice do you give to those who are looking to hone and own their unique voice?
Yep. So again, start with the top two or three things you want to get across, no more than three. Think of a quick personal story or reflection that you can use to open that's related to your message. Always have a feedback loop, someone in the audience who can tell you the truth, right? And then when you get that feedback, go back, redraft, start again. It's got to continuously be a learning process for you.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't said already as it relates to leadership and engaging one's audience?
Yeah, I think it's important to watch people you already think are great at this. Yeah. So I think if you pick people who you admire and respect and like to listen to, then watch them multiple times because you'll begin to see a pattern in the things that they do. And I think that's important. You can really learn if you take time to listen, reflect, understand how they're coming across. One of my favorite examples is I do a ton of interviewing in my work. Back to this asking good questions and listening, right? One of my favorite interviewers of all time is Oprah. I've been watching her for 20 years. Like Oprah asks the world's best questions.
Yes.
And somehow she also gets us to relate personally and openly and authentically in the way that she states things. And so I've just been watching her for years because I think that she helps me in all of the things that I would be doing too, right? Like I think watching her helps me to get better at the interviewing that I have to do. So I would just encourage people to think of who you like and then go learn from them.
Absolutely. There's so much to be said for that emulation, and love her ability to both get that heart connection through a messaging as well, and the emotional, intelligent aspects of it, in addition to just the rote questions.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating. This is a question we ask of all of our guests on the show. Do you think great business communication is more of an art or science, and why?
Yeah, I know. I listened to you ask this question, and I think I'm going to wuss out and be the same as most people and say it's both. The truth of the matter is there is science behind great communication. And do yourself a favor and just go pick up a couple business books on how to be a great communicator. You know, Zig Ziglar from back in the day. I mean, These things have been around a long time, right? And you can learn the framework of communication, but what really brings it to life, that's the art. That's the piece that's authentically you. I would say, think about yourself as an artist. What color do you bring? What's the story that you tell? Why would people want to listen to you? Why do you count, right? Yeah. And make sure you incorporate that into your message.
Love that answer. Final question here. What advice would you have for aspiring business leaders who want to improve their communication?
So I deal with a lot of senior people, and this is not their favorite answer. But the truth of the matter is we never get done learning, and we should always be practicing. So the fact of the matter is practice and then practice again. And the more you're afraid of it, do it again. Because the more you do it, the less fear you'll have, the better off you'll get, more confident. Just in general, the better the experience is going to be for you and for the audience. Yes. So that's the first thing. The second thing I tell people is reward yourself. I think a lot of times we forget. We need a pat on the back. We need a reason to do this. Like, this is not always fun for everybody. Yep. So if you're going to go do this, plan something afterwards that you're like, hey, I got through this. I did this. Maybe go play a round of golf, or go have a nice dinner, or go to the spa. But do something to reward yourself whenever you do this, so that every time you do that practice and it gets a little bit better, you feel better, more confident, and you get to go do something fun.
I love that reward answer. I think it's the first time we've heard it on the podcast, and it resonates quite a bit. Thank you. Well, Corinne, on behalf of myself and our listeners, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I really love the answers you had provided, and thank you for your thoughtful preparation and feedback.
Love it. Thanks so much for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Think Deeply, Speak Simply. To learn more about the art and science of communicating ideas, visit our free resources at Prezent.com. That's Prezent.com.